Hercule Poirot and the Woman Who Waited in the Rain. Hello and welcome to Hidden Clue. I'm Jonah.
Are you eagerly awaiting Christmas and the winter holidays? Or do you enjoy the easy warmth of summer more? Share your thoughts below and be sure to subscribe to help our cozy community grow. Now let's get into tonight's mystery. Chapter 1. The Woman by the Bridge. The rain had been falling since morning, a soft, unhurried curtain that blurred the outlines of hedgerows and made the road gleam like dark glass. Within the small hired carriage, Hercule Poirot sat very straight, one gloved hand resting on the handle of his umbrella, the other on his small travelling case. Outside, the countryside seemed wrapped in a kind of sleep, a drowsy hush broken only by the rhythmic patter against the roof. He found it oddly comforting, the way England could turn even a storm into something civilized. As the wheels slowed on the approach to a narrow bridge, the driver leaned forward, squinting through the mist. Beyond the arching rail, the river moved lazily, its surface flecked with silver circles where the rain struck and spread. Poirot, peering through the glass, saw her then, a solitary figure standing by the stone parapet. She held no umbrella, though one hung by its loop from her wrist, unopened. Her hat was tilted low, her coat dark with rain. She seemed to be listening to the river. Poirot tapped on the window. "Driver, stop a moment, if you please." The horse gave a weary snort as the carriage drew to a halt. Poirot stepped down carefully, the rain kissing his shoes, and raised his umbrella with precision. He approached the woman, noting the details that others might not, the perfect stillness of her posture, the way one hand rested on the railing as though counting the drops. "Madame," he said gently, "forgive the intrusion."
You will be drenched. She turned her face slightly.
Beneath the brim of her hat, her expression was calm, almost serene. "It does not matter," she replied. Her voice was low, neither warm nor cold, but distant, like something remembered. "You are waiting for someone, perhaps?" Her eyes moved back to the river. "Yes," she said simply.
I am waiting. Poirot followed her gaze.
There was only the water, brown and swollen with rain, sliding past in endless procession. No boat, no figure on the opposite bank, no sound but the whispering storm. He inclined his head. "Then I shall wish you good fortune in your waiting." She nodded once, and Poirot returned to the carriage. As the horse clopped away toward the village, he looked back through the mist. The woman had not moved. Why did she wait there in the rain when no train was due? Poirot had seen patience before, but never like this. The inn at Trémaux Village stood just beyond the square, a modest building with whitewashed walls and smoke curling gently from its chimney. By the time Poirot arrived, the rain had thinned to a mist, and the air smelled of wet earth and wood smoke. He stepped inside, grateful for the warmth that rushed to meet him. The glow from the hearth painted the low beams gold, and a clock somewhere ticked with the calm assurance of a place untouched by haste. "Welcome, sir," said a woman with an apron and kind, watchful eyes. "You'll be wanting the fire, I expect. Sit yourself near the grate." Poirot bowed slightly. "Madame is most perceptive. The damp, it is a foe most persistent." Mrs. Lyle, as the brass name tag on the counter confirmed, brought him a towel and a cup of steaming tea. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who ran her house like a ship, not unkindly, but with rules known and unspoken. As Poirot removed his shoes to dry near the fire, she lingered, as though conversation were part of the service. "Not many strangers this time of year," she said, settling her hands on her hips. "Though we did have a few coming down from London last week. Police, I think." Poor Mrs. Everleigh gave them no satisfaction, so off they went again. Poirot looked up from his teacup. "Mrs. Everleigh?" Mrs. Lyle nodded, lowering her voice as if the walls might overhear. "Lives out by the river. Fine lady once. She's been standing by that bridge 3 days now, waiting. Folks say for her husband, though he's not likely to be crossing it again." He said nothing, merely stirred his tea. The spoon tapped softly against the porcelain, a delicate sound in the stillness. Mrs. Lyle hesitated before mentioning the bridge again.
Every village keeps its own weather, and even when the rain has stopped, she murmured.
Ours lingers somehow, Poirot smiled faintly.
A poetic observation, she shrugged.
Truth more than poetry, if you ask me. He thanked her, asked for a room, and when she left to prepare it, he turned back to the fire. The flames bent and fluttered, and he thought again of the woman's face by the river, so calm, so certain, and so very wet. Chapter 2. A House by the River. The morning broke pale and silver, the last of the rain drifting away like smoke. Poirot set out from the inn with measured steps, his cane tapping softly along the lane. The air carried that fresh scent left behind after a storm, a mingling of damp leaves, cold stone, and the faint sweetness of distant blossoms. Overhead, clouds parted shyly, revealing a hesitant blue. Trémaux Village receded behind him, its chimneys sending up thin threads of smoke. The road to Everley Manor wound along the river, bordered by willows that leaned close, as if eavesdropping on the water's quiet song. Poirot, ever precise, noted how the current ran stronger near the bend. The same place, he remembered, where the woman had stood. The image of her remained with him, the closed umbrella, the calm defiance against the weather, the patience of someone waiting for the past to return. When the manor appeared, it did so almost reluctantly, a stately house half-veiled by ivy and thyme. The iron gate hung open, as though expecting someone who never came. Poirot paused, admiring the symmetry of its design, before stepping through. Gravel crunched beneath his shoes. The garden was orderly yet tired, with roses blooming bravely in the chill and a stone sundial still dripping with rain. By the river's edge stood 2 chairs, one dry beneath an awning, the other soaked to its seat. Poirot observed them in silence, fingertips pressed together. 2 chairs for 2 hearts, he murmured, but only one remains to sit. The front door opened before he could knock. A young housemaid, pale and cautious, greeted him with a curtsy. "Mrs. Everley is unwell, sir. She takes no callers." "Then you may inform her that Monsieur Hercule Poirot calls not as a stranger but as a friend to the truth," he said softly. The maid hesitated, uncertain, then stepped aside. Inside, the house smelled faintly of lavender and coal smoke. Through a half-open door, Poirot glimpsed the mistress of the house seated by the window, motionless, her hands clasped in her lap. The stillness of her form matched that of the house itself, as though grief had wrapped both woman and home in the same quiet veil. The study at Everley Manor was a chamber of shadows and polish, the kind of room where every surface seemed to have absorbed a century of thought. Poirot entered quietly, his eyes adjusting to the dimness. Candles flickered on the mantel, their light trembling over dark oak shelves lined with worn leather volumes. The faint scent of tobacco lingered, old, ghostly, and undisturbed. The housekeeper, a neat woman in grey, spoke in a whisper as though afraid to wake something. "Mr. Everley spent most of his evenings here, sir. Since his disappearance we've left it as it was." Poirot inclined his head. A shrine to memory, perhaps? She did not answer. Her gaze lingered on the armchair by the hearth, its cushion still slightly indented, as if the master might return at any moment to reclaim it. Poirot moved closer, taking in the ordered desk, the stack of correspondence tied with ribbon, the empty space on the wall where sunlight left a clean rectangle amid dust. "A portrait once hung there?" he asked. "Yes, sir."
"Of Mr. Everley and his wife, painted the year they were married. Mrs. Everley had it removed last week." Poirot touched the frame and saw the faint mark where another had stood beside it.
"A man's portrait can lie, but not his absence," he murmured. He turned toward the desk again. One drawer was slightly ajar, its brass handles smudged. Inside lay only an ink bottle and a single envelope, empty. The other drawers were locked. Nearby, the coat rack stood crooked, a hanger swinging lightly. One raincoat was missing, the dust mark beneath it fresh. The door opened softly. Mrs. Everley entered, her presence composed, her steps as quiet as the room itself. She wore a pale gown and no jewellery. Her face was delicate, with that particular stillness born not of peace but of endurance. "Monsieur Poirot?" she said, acknowledging him with a faint nod. "I was told you might call." He bowed slightly.
"Madam, forgive me."
"I admire order, and yet, in this room, the order hides something disorderly." Her lips curved, barely. "You sound very sure of that." Poirot smiled gently. "Only curious, madame, always curious." Chapter 3. The Village. Whisper. The next morning found Poirot once more at the inn, a cup of strong tea before him, and the scent of toast and damp wool in the air. The rain had passed, leaving the village washed and glistening, its streets filmed with shallow puddles that caught the morning light. Mrs. Lyle had already begun her customary circuit of conversation, balancing the teapot like a weapon of truth. "Of course," she said, leaning confidentially toward Poirot. "It isn't the first time someone's gone missing from Everley Manor. They say his grandfather vanished for a week once, ran off to Bath with an actress. Came home as though nothing had happened, bold as you please." From the next table, a retired postmistress interrupted, her tone edged with rivalry. "That was never proven. And this time it's not the same. There were letters, weren't there?"
"Letters that never reached their mark," raised.
"Letters, madame?" "Oh, yes," she said, pleased to be asked. 3 at least. One from the solicitor, one from the bank, and one to Mrs. Everley herself.
"All gone astray." Mrs. Lyle poured more tea.
"It's the postboy. Never writes since his father drowned, poor thing. Avoids the bridge now, they say."
"Won't even look at it after dark." Poirot stirred his cup, the spoon tapping softly.
"Everyone in Trémaux knew something," he said mildly, though few knew it was worth knowing. At the hearth, the fire gave a small sigh, shifting its embers. Outside, children's laughter trailed past the window, a moment of life bright against the hush of speculation. Poirot turned his chair slightly, his gaze following a young boy who lingered near the door, clutching a satchel of letters. "You there?" Mrs. Lyle called. "Mind your manners!" "Monsieur Poirot's from London." The boy hesitated, then spoke quickly, eyes wide. "I seen someone by the river last night."
"Not the lady, no, the man had a lantern."
He was standing where the willows dipped down.
Then he went across the bridge. The room stilled.
Only the clock dared continue its ticking. Poirot smiled faintly, his tone almost kind. "Merci, mon petit. You have a good memory, I think. And good memories," he added softly, "are dangerous things in a village that prefers forgetting." The rain returned that evening, thin at first, then steady as a heartbeat. Poirot walked alone through the narrow lane that led to the bridge, his umbrella angled against the wind, the cobbles glistening beneath his shoes. The lamps burned faintly in the mist, their reflections trembling on the wet ground. Somewhere far off, a church bell marked the hour, its tones soft and uncertain, as though time itself had begun to hesitate. At the riverbank, all sound was consumed by water. The surface moved sluggishly beneath the weight of the rain, smooth as silk until a drop struck and scattered it into 1,000 silver rings. Poirot paused where the gravel path turned to mud, his gaze travelling over the reeds that bent under the drizzle. Each blade shone like polished glass. He closed his umbrella and stood still, listening. From beneath the bridge came a low creak. Wood, shifting perhaps, or something heavier, brushing against the stone supports. Poirot's keen eyes traced the ground. 2 sets of footprints, blurred yet distinct. One led from the road to the edge of the river, the other only halfway back. He knelt, the faint scent of oil rising from the earth. Lamp oil, sharp and recent. His fingers touched a broken reed, flattened as if under weight. Something had been dragged here, he thought. Something neither wholly lost nor meant to be found. Above him, the rain thickened, and the river answered with a quiet surge. He leaned over the railing, his reflection wavering in the black water below. "In the dark," he murmured, "the truth behaves like a reflection, perfect, until touched." For a moment, he could almost see her there again, the woman in her soaked gloves, her gaze fixed upon the current. not waiting for rescue perhaps, but for proof. Poirot's eyes followed the slow drift of leaves caught in the current, circling, vanishing beneath the bridge. The lantern on the far bank flickered once, a stray light, or memory, playing tricks. Poirot replaced his hat, his breath pale in the mist. Something heavy had been dropped here, yes. But weight, he reflected, is not only of the body, it is also of the heart. Chapter 4. The letter from London. Morning came pale and clean, the air rinsed by the night's rain. Trémaux Village stirred awake beneath soft grey light. Shutters opening, the slow tread of boots on the cobblestones, a milk cart clattering faintly down the lane. Inside the inn, Poirot sat at his usual table near the window, watching the world resume its small routines. Mrs. Lyle was sorting the post with ceremonious care, as though each envelope contained a secret the village might yet deserve. Among the stack was one bearing a London seal, thick paper, pressed wax and handwriting that carried authority. It was delivered not to Poirot, but to Mrs. Everleigh. Mrs. Lyle paused before handing it to the boy, who would make the walk to the manor. The handwriting was firm, she murmured, but the ink trembled. Poirot looked up curious. A strange observation, madame, yet a perceptive one. Later that afternoon, as the sky cleared in patches of hesitant blue, Poirot took his walk past the post road. He met Mrs. Everleigh near the gate of her garden, her gloved hands clasping the letter as though it burned faintly through the paper. The seal was already broken. "Bad news, madam?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then smiled, a small, careful thing. "No, monsieur, merely formalities."
"Business from London." Her voice wavered like the reflection of her face in the window beside them.
Poirot bowed and stepped aside, watching her disappear into the house. Through the curtain, a shadow passed, restless, uncertain. That evening, by the inn's fire, the news had already made its way to Mrs. Lyle's ear, and from there to half the village.
"A solicitor's letter," they whispered.
An inheritance, perhaps? One that required proof of death before payment could be made. Poirot sipped his tea slowly, letting the words circle the room like the smoke from the hearth. "London," he said softly to himself, "has sent a whisper, and whispers travel fast in the rain." He thought of Mrs. Everleigh's trembling hand, of the letter's broken seal, and of the quiet weight behind her smile.
Money, love, and loss, the eternal trinity of deceit.
Somewhere within it, he knew, waited the true beginning of the mystery. The next morning, a faint sun trembled over the damp fields, turning every droplet on the hedges to a bead of silver. Poirot walked the narrow lane to Everleigh Manor, a small glove folded neatly in his hand. He had found it by the gate the day before, pale leather faintly scented with lavender. A simple reason to call, and yet enough. Mrs. Everleigh received him in the morning room, where the curtains filtered a calm, milky light. Tea was already waiting, the steam curling like thought. She thanked him softly for returning the glove and motioned for him to sit. "You are kind, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her tone gracious but distant. "Kindness, madame, is a small coin I spend freely," he replied, smiling. "But I confess I also have curiosity."
"It is my unfortunate vice," she laughed. "Just once, and with surprise." "About my husband?"
Poirot inclined his head.
"About everything that is,
delicate yet not spoken. Tell me, if you will, he was fond of walking, yes? Particularly to the bridge?" Her gaze shifted toward the window where the river glimmered beyond the trees. "He would wait for me there after quarrels," she said quietly. "He said the river forgave what people could not." Poirot's voice softened.
"And you, madame, did you forgive?"
There was a pause long enough for the clock to mark 2 small beats.
"I wanted to," she said.
But he was proud. He borrowed money from friends, from the wrong ones. When the bills came, he would smile and say it was all temporary. I believed him, until belief became too expensive. Poirot studied her hands as they turned her teacup. "Sometimes, madame," he said gently, "love hides itself behind the neatest lies." Her eyes lifted to meet his, clear but trembling. "You think I lied to him?" "I think," he said, You lied for him. Outside, a breeze moved through the wet garden, lifting the scent of earth and rain. She said nothing more, and Poirot did not press her. In silence, truth seemed closer, not loud but patient, waiting like the river for its moment to rise. Chapter 5. The Gathering. The rain had ceased, leaving the windows silvered with moisture, and the lawns beyond glimmering faintly beneath a low grey sky. In the drawing-room of Everley Manor, candles were being lit, one by one, their soft gold reflections trembling across polished wood and china. The scent of beeswax mingled with the faint aroma of damp wool. Coats hung by the door, umbrellas dripping discreetly into a copper tray. Poirot stood by the hearth, immaculate as ever, arranging teacups upon a low table as though composing an orchestra of porcelain. "Every chair must be occupied," he murmured, "for every truth, mes amis, must have its seat." Mrs. Everley had agreed to his small gathering with quiet reluctance. Now she sat in the high-backed chair nearest the fire, her posture graceful, her face calm but pale. The vicar arrived first, his soft voice apologetic for the lateness of his carriage. Then Mrs. Lyle entered, bringing with her a gust of practical warmth and the faint scent of baking. A final guest, young Inspector Dore from the nearby town, was persuaded to join them under the guise of civility. The scene, to any casual observer, was charming. Tea poured from a silver pot, thin sandwiches arranged on china plates, conversation beginning with the universal topic of weather. "Ah, yes," the vicar said, settling his cup upon its saucer. "It seems the rain has washed away all unease." "The river runs clearer this morning," Mrs. Lyle snorted softly.
Clear rivers don't mean clear consciences.
"I've lived long enough to know that." Poirot smiled into his teacup. "Ah, madame, you are a philosopher." The laughter that followed was gentle, but beneath it the room seemed to hold its breath. Poirot's eyes wandered from face to face. The vicar's hands trembled faintly when the word forgiveness was mentioned. Mrs. Lyle's glance darted toward Mrs. Everley each time her husband's name surfaced, and Mrs. Everley herself, she spoke little, but when she did, her voice moved like a thread drawn carefully through silk. "I do not think guilt always belongs to those who appear to carry it," she said softly. Poirot inclined his head. "Indeed, madame, sometimes guilt hides behind those who watch others bear it for them." The inspector shifted in his chair. The flame of the central candle bent slightly as Mrs. Everley drew breath, and Poirot noticed it, the small physics of emotion revealing itself in air and light. He let silence linger, then began to recount, so innocently that even the vicar smiled, a parable of a man who had vanished after deceiving those he loved. He spoke of letters written and not sent, of debts repaid in secrets, of bridges that remembered footsteps long after they were washed clean. As he spoke, Mrs. Everley's hand moved toward her teacup, but did not lift it. Mrs. Lyle watched her intently. The vicar murmured something about divine testing, and the inspector, pretending to listen, was really noting how Poirot's story twisted gently around each of them like smoke. At last, Poirot paused and turned to the hostess. "Madame," he said softly, "you must forgive me.
I speak too much."
But tell me, when it rains, do you still walk to the bridge?" Her answer was almost a whisper. "Not any more." A shiver passed through the room. Not fear, exactly, but recognition. Poirot smiled kindly, as though the question had been nothing at all. "Then perhaps," he said, pouring the last of the tea, "the time for waiting has passed." The fire crackled. Beyond the glass, mist began to rise again from the river, curling upward like an unfinished thought. Inside, the candles flickered over their faces, the innocent, the guilty, and those uncertain between. And Poirot, ever patient, let the quiet grow rich with secrets not yet ready to speak. The drawing-room was quiet again. The fire had burned low, its last embers breathing out a slow orange sigh. Poirot remained by the hearth, tidying the small traces of company, half-empty teacup, a forgotten biscuit, the faint perfume of conversation still drifting in the air. He was about to leave when he noticed something pale against the edge of the rug, a handkerchief, delicately folded once, then fallen open. He bent to pick it up. The linen was fine, the embroidery old-fashioned, a monogram, faint but unmistakable. Not E for Everly. L. Poirot's brow furrowed. L, he murmured, turning it between his fingers. And yet none of my guests were of such an initial. He considered the vicar's gentle hands, Mrs. Lyle's briskness, Mrs. Everly's poise. None fitted the clue. And yet, somewhere between their words that evening, he had felt the ghost of another presence. The letter from London. The maid's hesitation when he had asked who handled the post. The missing raincoat from the study. He moved to the window, watching the faint outline of the river where mist now drifted like breath. The handkerchief carried a light fragrance, not lavender, not rose, but something sharper like cologne. A man's scent, faded yet distinct. Poirot smiled softly to himself. Ah, so the waiting perhaps was not for the husband. He folded the handkerchief carefully and placed it upon the mantel. Behind him, the house creaked, old timbers settling or memory shifting in its sleep. Through the doorway, the maid appeared, startled to find him still there. Her eyes darted to the mantel, then to his face. "You found it, sir?" she said quickly. Poirot's gaze lingered. "You know its owner?" A pause. "I believe it was left by a visitor some weeks ago." "Indeed." Poirot smiled gently. "Then it seems Trémaux Village has had more visitors than it remembers." He thanked her, bid good night, and stepped out into the cool night air. Behind him, the manor stood silent but watchful, a house that had not yet finished speaking. In his pocket, the handkerchief rustled faintly, as though eager to tell its story. Chapter 6. Shadows Beneath the Surface. The morning broke with a trembling light that slipped through the curtains, like the last whisper of a dream. Poirot sat in the small breakfast room of the manor, his cup untouched, eyes thoughtful. The maid, Clara, entered quietly, her face pale but resolute. He had asked to speak with her alone, and she had agreed, though her hands now twisted nervously in her apron. "You are kind to come, mademoiselle," Poirot said gently. "I do not wish to trouble you, only to understand what troubles you already." She hesitated, then drew a small, folded paper from her pocket.
"It isn't mine, sir," she said.
"But I was the one who kept it from her." Poirot nodded slowly, encouraging her with silence. "It began with the letters," she continued. "A man from London, not a husband. He wrote kindly, almost desperately, said he would help with the debts, that he'd arrange matters so Mr. Everly wouldn't face prison. He was to come to Trémaux, but he never did." Her eyes shimmered as though reflecting the rain beginning again beyond the window. She waited for him by the bridge, every afternoon, rain or shine. When her husband went missing, she said nothing, but she still went, as if to meet a ghost she'd made herself. Poirot's expression softened.
"You cared for her, yes?"
Clara nodded. "She was kind,
Lonely but proud. I couldn't bear to see her hope die in front of me.
so I burned some letters before she could." Poirot leaned forward.
And this one, you kept it?"
"Yes, sir."
"I couldn't destroy it."
The words felt too sad. She opened the paper, its ink blurred by tears or time. The signature was faint, but visible. "Laurent." "Ah," murmured Poirot. The L. The fire popped in the grate, and for a long moment neither spoke. The rain quickened against the glass, drumming softly like a heartbeat beneath words left unsaid. Poirot rose, his manner tender, almost fatherly.
"You see, my dear, it is not always the dead who vanish."
Sometimes it is the living escaping through silence. She looked up, startled by the kindness in his voice.
"Then she didn't kill him?"
Poirot smiled faintly. "That, mademoiselle, is what the river will soon decide." The rain had eased by afternoon, leaving the garden washed clean, the air cool and metallic with the scent of wet stone. Poirot wandered through the corridor toward the morning room, where a row of umbrellas and walking sticks rested neatly by the door. Among them stood Mrs. Everly's parasol, ivory silk, its handle carved like a shepherd's crook. He lifted it delicately, feeling the faint dampness along the fabric's edge. The tip of the parasol caught the light. Something glimmered there, a thin, uneven trace of colour. Poirot turned it closer to the window, where the pale sun fell across the polished floor.
A thread of red paint clung stubbornly to the metal point. He smiled quietly. "Ah, Mademoiselle Parasol, you have taken a walk of your own, n'est-ce pas?"
The hue was unmistakable, the same dull crimson that lined the iron rails of the riverside bridge. He remembered that first evening, Mrs. Everleigh motionless beneath the rain, her umbrella closed, her gloved hand resting on the bridge's painted bar, or so he had thought. Perhaps she had not been waiting at the bridge, but testing it. He ran a finger along the parasol's edge. There, just beneath the silk, the faintest dent, as if it had struck something solid.
A desperate gesture or an accident?
He pictured the moment again, the flash of rain, the river rising, the sound of something heavy breaking the surface, then silence. Poirot straightened the parasol and replaced it gently in its stand. His reflection in the glass door seemed to study him in turn. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, "how perfectly the picture paints itself. And yet, I must not rush the brush." Behind him, footsteps approached. Mrs. Everleigh appeared in the doorway, her expression calm, though her voice carried a tremor. "Is something the matter, Monsieur Poirot?" He turned with a smile as soft as his tone. "Nothing, madame. I was merely admiring your parasol."
"It has such character." Her gaze flicked briefly toward it, then away.
"It's quite old," she said. "It has seen too much weather." Poirot inclined his head. "As have we all, madame." When she left, he lingered a moment longer, the faint red glint still in his mind. The river outside whispered faintly under the returning mist, and Poirot, ever patient, waited for the waters to speak. Chapter 7. The Rain Return. Night had fallen softly over Trémaux Village, the kind of rain-drenched darkness that seems to hush even the clocks. In his small room at the inn, Poirot sat at the writing desk, a candle guttering beside him, its flame bending in rhythm with the rain that tapped gently on the panes. Before him lay his notes, neat squares of paper arranged like a chessboard. Footprints, a missing photograph, a raincoat gone astray, a letter of inheritance, a parasol marked with red paint. Each clue glimmered faintly in his mind like beads of water catching the light. He leaned back, hands steepled beneath his chin. "Every puzzle," he murmured, "ends where it began, at the bridge." He could see it as clearly as the first night he arrived. The woman standing in the rain, her face serene yet haunted, the river whispering secrets beneath her silence. She had not waited for rescue. She had waited for release. Poirot's eyes moved to the smallest note on his desk. Raincoat missing. It had belonged to Mr. Everleigh, and yet no body had been found. A man vanishes, his debts unbearable, his honour bruised. A letter arrives from London, an inheritance, but only in death. And a wife, dutiful and proud, remains to guard his memory. He touched the edge of the paper, tracing the logic gently, as one might the pattern of lace.
"Ah," he whispered, "but who benefits from such a death? Only one who knows it is not true." Mr. Everleigh perhaps had chosen to vanish, to spare his wife, to cleanse her name with the fiction of his drowning.
And she, poor soul, had learned of it only too late. Her silence, her vigils by the river, her trembling at every mention of London, all not guilt, but grief for a deception meant to save her. Outside, the rain strengthened, the rhythm deepening like a slow heartbeat. Poirot closed his notebook and looked toward the window. "But the river," he said softly, "it does not keep secrets forever. Sooner or later it returns what men think lost." He stood, smoothing his waistcoat, and smiled faintly. The case, like the weather, was circling back to where it had begun. The truth was ready to surface. All that remained was to watch and to wait. The rain had softened to a gentle drizzle, silver threads weaving across the surface of the river. Poirot walked the familiar lane to the bridge, each step muted against the wet cobbles. The village slept lightly behind him, the lanterns dimmed, the The streets hushed. Somewhere upstream, water lapped against stones with a steady, thoughtful rhythm, as though the river itself were counting the moments since last night. Near the riverbank, a small crowd had gathered, villagers moving quietly, careful not to disturb one another. A boy knelt beside something dark and sodden. Poirot approached, his umbrella shielding him from the drizzle, and saw the coat, soaked, folded oddly against the mud. Its pocket bore a small treasure, the missing photograph, perfectly preserved despite its tumble. "The river remembers kindness, and cruelty in equal measure," he murmured, noting how the water had carried both debris and truth alike. From the far side of the bridge, a figure emerged. Mrs. Everleigh's umbrella was closed, her gloves damp, but her posture had changed. She no longer searched the current. Her eyes were calm, resting instead upon Poirot as he approached. "Monsieur," she said softly, her voice carrying the faint tremor of relief rather than fear. "You have done what I could not." Poirot inclined his head gently, his expression measured. "Madame, it is the river that has spoken. I merely listened." She smiled faintly, and the corners of her eyes lifted, not with triumph, but with quiet release. The photograph, the coat, the trace of red paint on the parasol, all threads of worry now returned, no longer suspended in ambiguity. Her vigil was over. The water rippled beneath the bridge, a mirror to the pale sky. Poirot studied it for a long moment, sensing the completion of a cycle. The village had held its breath, the rain had performed its ritual, and now the river had given back what was needed to soothe the heart. Mrs. Everleigh extended her hand slightly, a gesture of thanks unspoken yet complete. Poirot accepted it lightly, acknowledging the weight of the story that needed no further words. Behind them, the bridge stood serene, the railings glistening faintly with leftover rain, silent witnesses to patience, grief, and the quiet triumph of truth. The drizzle persisted, soft as a lullaby. Poirot turned slowly, casting one last glance at the river, then walked back toward the village, leaving behind only footprints and the gentle echo of resolution. Chapter 8. Reflections and Farewell. The morning light filtered softly through the inn's lace curtains, turning the room a pale gold. Poirot sat at the small table near the window, a cup of steaming tea before him. Across from him, Mrs. Lyle arranged a few sprigs of lavender in a chipped vase, the delicate aroma mingling with the scent of fresh bread and the lingering warmth of the fire. "The roses in my garden have survived the rain well this year," she said, stirring her tea gently. "Even the blackthorn seems less forbidding after so much water." Poirot nodded, lifting his cup and inhaling the fragrant steam. "There are rains," he observed, "that cleanse and rains that confess. Yesterday, the river performed both." She smiled faintly, glancing toward the window where the village stirred, slowly awake. "You speak as though it tells stories, monsieur." "Perhaps it does, if one is patient enough to listen." He inclined his head. "Patience, madame, is the essential instrument of observation. One hears far more in quiet moments than in frantic ones, and sometimes the heart itself must wait for the truth to rise in its own time." They sipped their tea in companionable silence, the room filled with the soft ticking of the clock and the distant caw of a bird outside. The light shifted across the table, highlighting the edges of a small porcelain plate and the subtle ripple of the tea in its cup. "Do you travel often, monsieur?" Mrs. Lyle asked, breaking the pause. "Occasionally," Poirot replied. "But the world is large, and mysteries like gardens require tending. One must leave places in better order than they were found, if one can." Her eyes softened. "You have certainly tended well here," he smiled, modest yet precise. "Merci, madame." "And you, with your village, your tea and your roses, provide a sanctuary for patience and reflection. It is as necessary as any investigation." The conversation drifted gently into the mundane, weather, village gossip, travel tales, but beneath the quiet chatter lingered an unspoken acknowledgement. Some truths, Poirot thought, do not require confrontation, accusation, or even explanation. They require only awareness and the grace to let them rest. The tea finished, he rose and tucked his napkin neatly. Mrs. Lyle watched him with a warmth that carried gratitude, unspoken yet complete.
Outside, the sky had begun to clear, pale blue mingling with the last veils of mist.
Poirot stepped toward the door, ready to resume his journey, leaving behind quiet understanding, comfort, and the gentle rhythm of a village life touched by subtle revelation. The carriage rocked gently along the glistening lane, wheels whispering over wet cobblestones as the first drops of rain began again, soft and persistent. Poirot sat upright, his hands folded neatly on his lap, eyes fixed on the window where the village blurred into a wash of green hedges and grey roofs. The air smelled faintly of wet earth and moss, carrying a familiar comfort that only Trémaux could offer. Ahead, the riverside bridge emerged through the mist, its iron rails shining faintly. It was empty now. No figure, no waiting silhouette, only the water reflecting the faint drizzle and the soft outlines of trees. Poirot's eyes lingered, tracing the bridge's curve, recalling the woman who had once stood so patiently beneath the rain. "She no longer waits," he murmured softly to himself, "but sometimes, when the rain falls, I imagine she does." The memory of her gloves, the subtle tilt of her head, the quiet endurance of her vigil, it all returned with clarity, like a photograph brought to life in motion. He thought of her not with sorrow, but with understanding. Her vigil had been a meditation on hope and patience, a gentle negotiation with loss and longing. The mystery, he reflected, was never truly in the absence of her husband, but in the quiet space between grief and release. The carriage continued past the trimmed hedges and the softened outline of Everley Manor. Windows gleamed with a final candle flicker, suggesting domestic warmth, untroubled and steadfast. Poirot considered the handkerchief, the parasol, the letter, each small object a marker of lives intertwined, of choices hidden beneath layers of propriety and care. Even as the village faded behind him, the rain continued, gentle and deliberate. It wrapped the world in a rhythm both calm and knowing, reminding him that some resolutions are quiet, some truths arrive in subtle measures, and some hearts wait not for revelation, but for understanding. Poirot leaned back in his seat, the soft sway of the carriage a lullaby to the mind. In the reflective sheen of the river, in the gentle patter of rain against the window, he glimpsed the full story, not of guilt or crime, but of patience, love, and the unspoken bonds that endure. The bridge remained empty, yet full of meaning, a symbol of endurance and the quiet reconciliation of human hearts. He exhaled gently, the carriage carrying him forward, leaving Trémaux Village behind, but keeping its secrets, its stories, and its reigns alive in memory.